Hi, my name is Tanisha Shaw, and I'm a high school social studies teacher, grades 9 through 12. I've taught for 9 years in urban schools with populations of mostly African American students. It is through my teaching experiences that has led me to explore one of the most significant and often controversial issues in education: the achievement gap between Black and white students. I will use national data to help explain the achievement gap in order to answer the question, are standardized tests the best tool to measure student achievement? Finally, I will attempt to provide common sense solutions that I believe can make education more effective for all students. The issue of the achievement gap is very important because it represents broader social issues in American society, such as race, class, and equal opportunity. As a Black teacher to Black students, it is necessary to explore the issue that in context already predetermines that in comparison to white students, the education success of Black students will be less because it is behind. The continuing use of the term achievement gap continues to divide races and undermines the goals of Black people for equal access to the American dream. The poet Langston Hughes speaks to this in his poem Harlem, written in 1951. And I quote, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" The main idea of Hughes' poem is that the continual denial of success leads to either mental or the physical dropping out of students, especially our Black male students. If the success and subsequent dreams of Black students are deferred, the impact is the continuation of poverty and violence within their communities. This leads me to my underlying point of the presentation. Does the term achievement gap continue the perception of racial inferiority of Black people and racial superiority of white people? Political correctness would reject this statement, but let's look at what the numbers and the percentages say about the differences between Black and white students. First, to understand the achievement gap, let's look at the division and racial composition of most American schools. The National Center for Educational Statistics, as well as the National Assessment of Educational Progress, reviews the Common Core data as well as the math, reading, and assessment scores of 8th graders across the nation. In their findings, we see that in the United States, 77% of schools have student populations that have a low density between 0 to 20% of Black students. Only 10% of schools in the United States have a high density between 60 to 100% of Black student population. The average white student in the United States attends a school where Black students only compose about 9% of the student population, while the average Black student in the United States attends a school where Black students compose 48% of the student population. This reveals that schools, after all these years, remain segregated, even after there has been legislation and court rulings to have full integration. The National Center for Educational Statistics also reveals that in these schools, achievement for both Black and white students are lower in comparison to the national average in schools with high density population of Black students. It also reveals that even in these high density population schools, that white student achievement is still on average the same as if they attended a school where there was a low population of Black students. Black and white achievement gaps are larger in high density schools than lowest density. And overall, especially with our Black male students, that when Black students attend high density schools, they will achieve lower on standardized tests. These are interesting findings that speaks to the differences in opportunities for white and Black students. In states such as North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, the largest component of achievement gaps is found within the schools rather than across the schools. The size of achievement gaps between Black and white students would either increase or decrease when taking into account a student's socioeconomic status, their culture and language, their teacher's experience, and the total school characteristics. The divisions of students based on race and class predisposes students to lower standardized scores, an issue I will address much later. But the implications are even more controversial because, again, it implies that there is something either genetically or intellectually superior of white students over Black students. So let us look at two tables charting 8th grade math and reading scores over the last 40 years. You will notice that in the first graph here that is charting mathematics in 8th graders since 1973 to 2012, that overall there has been a growth in student achievement, both white and Black. However, the gap still is persistent and has not changed much. We see the same thing with the reading assessment scores as well. So what does this imply? Again, looking at the data, the implications are negative towards Black students, that Black students either are inferior in comparison to white students. The Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education, was viewed as a way to solve any gap between Black and white students. However, the Supreme Court ruling only ended de jure segregation, or legal segregation in public schools. However, the case did not impact de facto segregation, which is the dividing of races and classes through personal choices in housing and economic transactions. The system of education never changed its identity to meet the cultural and social needs of Black students. Black students and students of color had to acclimate themselves to an education system that was designed since the early 19th century to benefit white students and promote the cultural standards of Protestant Anglo-Saxons, thus the achievement gap. So what creates these differences? Let's look at some of the causes. The composition of the school. How does the composition of a school student population impact Black and white achievement? First, we notice that there is a clear relationship between the percentage of students in a school who are Black and an uneven distribution of key academic support tools, such as experience and effective teachers. In high-density schools, you have students from low socioeconomic backgrounds and broken family structures, students that face a counterculture that perceives academic success as acting white, and students who are tracked in classes differently and often unfairly. And then you have lower teacher expectations and, of course, higher discipline reports. Each of these things create differences in student opportunities and success. Next, have public policies contributed to continuing Black and white achievement gaps? There have been efforts by local and state and federal governments to fix the achievement gap, or to at least standardize education for all students. However, the problem continues. The public policies such as Head Start, school busing, national school lunch programs, No Child Left Behind, and the Race to the Top. These policies never really address the root causes of the achievement gap. They often blame the students, their parents, and communities for the achievement measurements that were based on biased information. Finally, what role does social status and parent education contribute to students' achievement? We know in high-density schools, Black students were often more eligible for free and reduced lunch and their parents had lower education than white students. In low-density schools, the number of Black students eligible for free and reduced lunch decreases, as well as their education attainment of their parents. So then what contributes to this steady decline and deficiency between the white students and Black students? Some argue that parents' IQ and educational attainment, cognitive stimulation, child nutrition, and emotional support all create the issues that consistently have shown that they have an impact on student achievement. So based on the findings, I have two critical views about the achievement gap and the use of standardized tests to measure student achievement. First, the use of standardized tests to determine student achievement is problematic because it continues the perpetuation of culturally biased curriculums and this culture of poverty that cannot reflect the true ability of all students, and it tends to blame underachievement on the students, their parents, and their communities. Here's what we know. Children from lower socioeconomic status do not have access to the opportunities as well as the cultural capital needed to close the achievement gap. We also know that school systems focus more on modifiable factors such as classroom size, school size, and teacher mobility, rather than the socioeconomic and racial factors that we just mentioned have a huge impact on student achievement. Because school systems fail to consider non-cognitive factors such as stereotype threats and code switching in the achievement of Black students, students continue to perform lower. The two terms, stereotype threats and code switching, is something that we really need to address further. What are they? Stereotype threats is this theory that negative stereotypes impact the performance of certain groups. When Black students know that they are always considered to be deficient, then they perform in a way that reflects that. Code switching, which I think is extremely important, is this theory that students of color, Black students, have to operate in two different cultures. Their success or their achievement is determined by their ability to understand the culture of popular society, which often means that they have to leave behind their own identity and culture just so that they could be successful. This also leads me to my second critical thought, that the argument is that there's not necessarily an achievement gap in the ability of students of color in comparison to white students, but there is a performance gap based on culture and expectations of student achievement. How can we change the negative rhetoric and implications behind the use of the achievement gap? We need to change the culture of education. So here are some solutions for increasing Black student achievement. Number one, let's end the reliance of standardized tests as a determinant of student proficiency. These tests are designed not to reflect all of the cultural identities and codes that students come from. Let's use more meaningful learning experiences for students, real-world applications of class lectures and assignments and curriculum. Cultural connections in curriculum and instruction. Students need to feel that they are wanted in the schools, and if they feel that they're wanted, then they will respond in kind. Rigorous and engaging curriculum. Challenging students is important, but when teachers and the system assumes that there is something deficient, then the curriculum will always stay mediocre. And finally, teachers. In schools where there is a high population of Black students, there needs to be experienced and committed teachers that have the experience and the knowledge in curriculum and instruction to meet the needs of these students. Until the recognition is made in the American education system that reflects all cultures and learning styles, then the use of the achievement gap will continue and dreams deferred will happen for Black students. And these dreams will either dry up like a raisin in the sun or they will explode.